Hi guys, welcome to my video. If you're new, that's fantastic. If you're coming back, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Today we are going to be sewing a blouse pattern from 1982. I'll put the picture right up here on the screen. It is one of many blouses that came with that pattern. We are going to be sewing option D today. I chose the one with the least amount of ruffles because I have never sewn sleeves before, and I've definitely never sewn puff sleeves. And also there's buttonholes, and I know my limits. I'm also going to be breaking up some of that footage of me struggling with a little bit of history. We're going to be talking about the New Romantic movement of the 1980s, kind of what that style was, how it got started, and how it's kind of still around today. And hopefully you like that. If you do like it, feel free to tell me in the comments section, or give this video a like or subscribe, or all three. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, we're going to start as per usual, ironing out all of our pieces. This is a pattern from 1982 and I'd like to use it again, so I'm not using steam, and I'm also tracing out each of the pieces with tracing paper that I've taped together. Also used parchment paper, but I didn't this time. I used a colored pencil this time rather than a regular pencil because it was way easier on the surface I'm doing. Now I'm pinning each of the pieces down to my fabric. With this fabric, I have to be careful to think about like what direction the pattern's going because it's a one-way pattern. So these pieces I actually folded like how they would normally be at the fabric store, but with the other pieces, the fabric is folded like hamburger style, if you know what I mean. And I actually pinned it 3 times because I pinned it the first time and then I realized that the pattern wouldn't work with 2 pieces of the same panel on it, so I had to trace those 2 pieces that are farthest from the camera again and then unpin it and then repin it, and then I realized that if I pin it the way that they want, half of my pieces will have the pattern upside down. So I had to unpin it and then unfold the fabric and then repin it again. I spent like half an hour pinning. I absolutely despise pinning. I stabbed myself like 800 times. And I was like about to give up, but I didn't, and I had some encouragement, which I really appreciated because I thought the piece turned out better in the end. Now I'm tracing out everything onto the fabric, marking all of the little triangles and stuff that they have. This piece has buttons, so there's buttonhole markers on each of the pattern pieces, so I wanted to make sure I also got those, so I made sure the buttons and the buttonholes were in the right places. Next I'm going to cut it. Now the first cut is most important. As you can see, my first cut was an immediate mistake because I did not add a seam allowance, so I had to take a minute for a breather, but I came back and just said, we'll fix it when we get to that. The rest of the pieces I did have a 1/2-inch seam allowance on, and I should have cut the little triangles to have an easier marker because the chalk ended up running away, wearing away. Now I am basting the 2 front panel pieces together. This is going to be the piece that I am eventually going to have the buttons on, the one that looks like a little Y. The other one that I'm basting it to is the right side of the shoulder. After basting this, I'm sewing it together. I finally figured out thread tension, so these seams are not falling apart on me instantly, which is lovely. I'm also trying to do what's called a French seam. I don't do it with this particular one, but I do use one later on. That's where you sew the right sides out first, and then you flip it inside out, press it, and then you sew the wrong sides out under the first seam so that it's a nice little fold rather than the raw edges. This is the other side of the shirt. The left side, I'm basting together the panel that's going to go under that Y-shaped panel and going to hold my buttons. Once again, I like basting better than pinning. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it's cleaner and I like it better. I won't be basting for all of these pieces because I had to do an ungodly amount of it for this shirt and I got so sick of it. I never wanted to look at a needle again. Once I finish up basting this, I have the other piece that's shaped like a Y, and I'm sewing it together so that you have a thicker piece of fabric that'll hold the shirt up better, and also when you open it, it won't be the wrong side of the fabric. It'll be 2 right sides. So this is the French seam that I'm doing. As you can see, I'm sewing very close to the edge. with the wrong sides together. And after I finish this up, I will press it. I don't think I show that. But then I'm going to sew it again with the wrong sides, so the sides that don't have the pattern on them together. So this piece that I'm sewing right now and the piece that I sewed previously are going to be the front of the shirt. This smaller piece here is going to go under that Y-shaped piece. Both of them, however, are going to have that like facing on the inside. The pattern said you were supposed to use interfacing, which helps keep the fabric stiffer, but I did not have it, and I did not want to go to the store, so I just said, we'll see how it goes. It did end up being stiff enough, so I wasn't really that worried. This is a quilting cotton, so it's pretty sturdy. If I was using like something like a seersucker that I used in my last garment, I would have definitely had to add interfacing, but this is a thick enough fabric on its own that I really didn't have to worry. Now, although my thread tension was correct, my thread did keep snapping when I sewed this. I don't know what I was doing wrong, but I did look up some videos this time, so maybe I'll continue to do that and improve rather than just making the same mistakes over and over again. We'll see. Who's ready to take a break from me struggling? I am. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the most versed in current fashion trends, but I do love vintage fashion, and I'm not free from the clutches of cultural osmosis, so I've been noticing a lot of vintage influences in current fashion trends. And I thought, well, I can break up the footage and talk about some fashion trends that I think are interesting. So I'm going to be talking to you today about the new romantic movement of the 1980s. It's around the same era that this blouse was made, and I am going to be telling you how it came about and giving you some examples of it in 1980 as well as in 2021. So let's get started. All right, before we go into the new romantic style, we have to talk about the romantic era of the 18th and 19th centuries. Now take a look at the different aspects of these outfits, the poofs, the ruffles, etc., and take that information, put it in your back pocket. We are going to be needing that later on. All right, let's bring it back to the 1970s and 80s. Punk was becoming mainstream, and the styles associated with punk were carrying less of that subversive punch that the rebellious youths were looking for. So the culture was ripe for another countercultural movement. In came the new romantic. Before we talk about the jumpsuits and face paints, let's talk about some of our key players. Steve John Harrington, also known as Steve Strange, was one of the most influential people in the New Romantic movement. Although he is most famous for his participation in the new wave synth pop group Visage, he got his start as a nightclub host and promoter. Rusty Egan was the drummer for a band called The Rich Kids, but he got his start working closely with Harrington as well as being a DJ at a nightclub called Blitz. Steve Strange and Rusty Egan started hosting Bowie nights in 1978 at Billy's nightclub in Soho. Here's where we see the dramatic aspects of punk mix and mingle with a new poppy vibe that had been coming around in music. People were starting to look back on historical aspects of fashion for their influence. Here's where you get to take that information out of your back pocket, remember it for a second, put it back in your pocket. We're not done yet. We still have one more club on our club crawl. By 1978, Bowie nights had moved to a nightclub in Covent Garden called Blitz. Now, the key to any good fashion movement is being able to tell people they're not being subversive enough. So Blitz would have a door policy of having a unique and original attitude that reflected Bowie's inventive style. Now, this drove the so-called Blitz kids to come back week after week with more inventive and dramatic looks. Individuality was one of the New Romantic movement's biggest driving forces, and by the time that it had reached Blitz, it was already a full-fledged fashion movement. Musical groups like Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran were already using the New Romantic style in their work, and artists like Boy George helped push the style and the movement into the mainstream media. All right, now that we have some faces to the movement, what did the style actually entail? The goal of the New Romantic movement was create an outfit that is unique to the wearer while still fitting into the genre. That means you see a lot of influence and you see a lot of exaggeration. The goal was sort of to take classic Hollywood glamour and combine it with 18th and 19th century ideals. This is where you get to take that information out of your back pocket and remember it. So you see lots of poofs, you see lots of frills, ruffles, bright colors, crazy patterns, wild hair, insane makeup. It's great. I love it. Think about how your cousin describes Mad Men and a high school Shakespeare play had a baby. Two of the big New Romantic designers were Jane Kahn and Patti Bell, and together they were credited for creating Duran Duran's signature look. Now, before we go into current fashion and how the New Romantic movement influenced it, let's take an example from 80's media that also has a lot of influences from the New Romantic movement. Jim Henson's Labyrinth. What better snapshot of the 1980s than Jim Henson's The Labyrinth? You've got it all. Poofy shirts, high fantasy Muppets, inexplicable music numbers, David Bowie. David Bowie himself is a great example of New Romantic fashion. He's got his flowy shirts, his big hair, androgynous look, and erotic pirate aesthetic. Here, we see David Bowie using his Bowie-ness, but not going full Bowie, and boy do I love it. But enough about Labyrinth. I really just wanted an excuse to talk about Labyrinth, so let's hurry up and get to the present. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Who cares? Besides some Midwestern rando goblin? Well, here is Gigi Hadid in a poofy little yellow number, and here are some other contemporary outfits that also have influences from the New Romantic style. So, as you can see, the New Romantic style isn't what it was, just as the heyday of punk fashion isn't what it was. But we still see a lot of influences with it today. Even my shirt is kind of a New Romantic shirt with the flashy pattern, and I've got some jewel tones in there. And of course it is a pattern from 1982 with some puffed sleeves. So, why talk about it? Let's hurry up and get back to me making it. Now I am basting the facing together, so that means that this is going to be the second layer of the same piece, and then after I get that together, I'm going to sew that little flap I had from connecting the shoulder part to the inner panel part, and after that I get sick of basting, so you won't have to watch that much footage of me hand sewing anymore. Okay, that's a lie, you'll have to watch a lot, but I'll talk over it at least, so it'll be a little bit less boring. Once again, sewing the right sides together, or right sides out, my bad. And then, wrong sides out. I actually really like how a French seam looks. It was so frustrating to have that raw edge. And this one is like a nice clean little edge, and it's a lot easier to sew down. As you can see, I didn't do it for all of my seams, but most of them. It's a little more time consuming, so I did get a little lazy. This is the hand basting part. While I was doing this, I should have been using a thimble because I used the tip of my finger like a thimble, which is not good because the needle isn't built like that, and it will go into the tip of your finger, and you will have to stop recording and take a minute. So I'm sewing the top of the shoulders together now. After this, we're going to try to add on the collar. So after I finished sewing the shoulders, I tried pinning the collar like a bunch of times. The directions were not clear in the slightest, so I was really confused about it. And I thought I did the wrong shoulder seam, so I ended up ripping out that seam that I just did to see if the collar would fit better. It didn't. I did actually do the correct seam the first time, so I wasted all my time ripping out that seam, and I had to redo it in the end. But the collar was very tricky for me. Right now I'm sewing the top of it together. It's going to fold over the neckline of the shirt and kind of match up so that it is even with my neck. There's like a little wavy bit at the bottom. It's kind of hard to tell, but that matches up to the dip in the neckline that you would see at the front of the shirt. And that was the trickiest part to match up to pin. I am pinning for such a long time here. I honestly cut a lot of footage out. I am embarrassed to say how much time I spent trying to get this collar to line up with the shirt, but the directions were the least clear thing I would ever see. the drawing was like a wave, and like it expected me to know all these words, which I didn't. But I'm sewing the one side of the collar down to the shirt right now. I'm going to end up folding it over and sewing it again eventually. Here I am hand basting that flap again. I did so much basting in this shirt. I got so frustrated with it. But this made the shirt look a lot better. It kept that little edge that I had sewing down, so it looked a lot prettier. It felt a lot better to wear. So after I finished basting that seam, I was supposed to baste the seam that will be used to gather up the sleeve. It said machine based, and I tried to get my machine to do it, and I thought I did the stitch correctly, but I did not, and it was not loose enough so that I could pull the fabric together. So I ended up having to rip that out by hand. If anyone's counting, this is the second seam I had to rip. There will definitely be more. And then I ended up just hand gathering it. And with hand gathering, you push it towards the center or the areas that they mark, and then you're going to sew it down a first time to just like secure those ruffles, and then you're going to sew it a second time on the shirt, or you're going to sew it a second time on the sleeve to like really get it there. And then once you sew it onto the shirt, you can take out the basting, and then you're going to eventually rip that second seam out, and it's going to allow the poof to reach its full potential rather than being kind of like squished down and stuck, which is how it would look without those seams. I'm sewing the shirt or the sleeve onto the shirt right now, and then I do not rip the seam directly after this because I was so sick of it. I ended up doing that later on. I did like a little bit of ripping with that seam, and then I was like, no, thank you. And I took a break, and as you can see, I've given up on basting. I'm just pinning the sides of the shirt together. We're going to do another French seam with this. I am hitting the home stretch with this shirt, so I'm very excited to see it finally coming together. The sides of the sleeves was a really fun seam to do. It was nice. It was straight. It was quiet. There was no ruffles. My thread didn't break too much. But after this, once again, I'm going to turn it inside out, press it, and sew it again. I didn't baste the seam down like I did on the inside panels. It didn't really bother me that much, so it wasn't really an issue. After that, home stretch, I'm sewing the collar down again. I can feel the shirt spiritually on my body finally, and also with pins on my body, just trying out the size. But now I'm sewing the buttonholes. This I had to watch a video for because I was very scared of it, and I didn't want to mess it up because it looked so pretty, and I knew that if the buttonholes were messed up, it would look wonky. So after that, I hem it, press it out, and I'm all done with this shirt. Here's how it turned out. I really liked it. It was a struggle, but I got through it. I really liked making the gathered sleeves. I thought they looked really cute. And next time I am going to be making some culottes. I will be using the fabric you saw behind me to make them, and I will be talking about the history of culottes and kind of what they are, what they mean to me and the world. I really hope you liked watching this video. I really liked making it as much as I seemed like I didn't. If you liked the part of the video where I talked about things other than what I was doing, please let me know in the comments. I would love to do more stuff like that too. But thank you guys, and feel free to check out my Etsy if you'd like, maybe. Hopefully I'll see you next time.